I want to welcome you here
Okay,
for
sorry,
joining us
late.
at our Spotlight Speaker Series, our monthly installment of scholarly and entertaining offerings for the FJMC community and beyond. I want to thank our volunteers and leadership, Bruce Fagan and Norwin Myers and Bob Watts, for helping to make this happen as always. Before we get to our speaker, Dr. Keren McGinity, I want to remind everyone that on April 6th, 2025, that's in less than a month from now, we'll be joined by Rabbi Dan Horowitz, who will discuss his book, Just Jewish, which is about reaching particularly the millennials generation in your Jewish community and how to create thriving opportunities for them. And that will take place, like I said, on Sunday, April 6th at 4:30 p.m. Pacific time, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. Dr. Keren McGinity serves as USCJ's first director of intermarriage engagement and inclusion. She is also a research associate at Hadassah Brandeis Institute at Brandeis University, where she taught American Studies. Previously, Dr. McGinity was an inaugural director of the Interfaith Families Jewish Engagement Graduate Program at Hebrew College. Her pioneering book, Still Jewish: A History of Women and Intermarriage in America, a National Jewish Book Award finalist in Marrying Out Jewish Men, Intermarriage, and Fatherhood, provided groundbreaking analysis about Jewish continuity by focusing on gender and change over time. Dr. McGinity's advice and opinions have appeared in numerous publications. I'm not going to list them all, but she's been published widely within the Jewish community. I'm sure you can find that if you Google her. We're here to discuss her newest book, in case you didn't know, Us Two: How Jewish, Muslim, and Christian Women Changed Our Communities. That came out in 2023. And it's also important to know that Dr. McGinity served as an ombud on the Committee on Sexual Misconduct in the Association of Jewish Studies, and as a board member of the Association for the Social Scientific Study of Jewry. She currently serves as the academic advisor on the Academic Advisory Council of the Jewish Women's Archive. When not roughing it in the woods of Maine, she lives in Brookline, Mass. Her daughter Shira is an alum of the Solomon Schechter Day School of Greater Boston, Ghan Academy, and the Talmid Fellowship Program in Israel. And to learn more about Dr. McGinity's work, please visit her professional website, Love and Tradition. Friends, thank you again for your patience. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome friend and colleague, Dr. Keren McGinity. Dr. McGinity, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Um, Noam, I'm really just honored to be here and to share this virtual space with everybody. I'm going to be sharing my screen. I have a number of visuals, including a video clip. So I won't be able to see you, but I encourage you to either put questions in the chat or jot them down. And I promise I'll linger online as long as there are questions this evening. It's lovely to see some familiar faces, as well as many other folks who are not blood related to me. Uh, so thank you so much for being here this evening. And without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and hope that the technology cooperates. I want to highlight the fact that it's Women's History Month, so there's much to celebrate. I also want to acknowledge that there are some folks, perhaps not on this particular Zoom, but there are folks who are celebrating Ramadan. And so I wish them a Ramadan Kareem and hope that Allah accepts their fasts. I'm dedicating my words this evening or afternoon, depending on where you're located, to the men, women, and children who suffered horrific sexual violence and worse on October 7th. My research and writing was completed in 2023. The original edition of the book that was published just 2 weeks before Hamas's attack. Seeing a keffiyeh, which has become a symbol of the Palestinian cause, feels very different now than when I was researching and writing. The title of my talk in and of itself is a trigger warning. And that said, I encourage everyone of all genders to make sure to take care of yourselves and each other during my presentation. So last October marked the 7th anniversary of the global #MeToo movement that began with a Twitter storm in October 2017, 11 years after activist Tarana Burke coined the phrase Me Too. As a feminist scholar and gender historian by training, I have long believed that the personal is political. And that said, I was accustomed to bearing witness to change over time, not to being a change agent in real time. My experience breaking the silence altered the course not only of my own life, but more importantly, served as a catalyst for systemic and structural changes in the Jewish community. I am not alone, nor are other Jewish, Muslim, and Christian women who are among the first to speak their truths to power that likewise left lasting influences on our faith communities. My talk will highlight some of these women, our community's responses, the similarities and differences between them, and the challenges that remain. I focus on women of these religious traditions for several reasons. First, Jews and Muslims are both minorities in America and both experience prejudices. It is oftentimes harder for victims to speak out because we don't want to disparage our own faith communities. Criticizing the Jewish, Muslim, and Muslim communities could fuel the fires of those who already hate us or turn others against us. The second reason is that minority religious communities are more insular than mainstream religious communities. People depend on each other, and this interdependence in turn creates a familial environment that is conducive to abuses of power by sexual predators. This problem, I want to emphasize, is not exclusive to Jewish or Muslim communities. Rather, it is a general problem for all subcultures. I also include valiant Christian women about whom the world knows too little, either about their agency or the role that faith plays in their activism, and how activism plays in their faith. A few words about the title and analytical lens. Hashtag Us Too was actually coined by Sophia Nelson, a biracial Christian woman and successful CNN commentator, to rectify the social erasure that women of color faced when the Me Too movement first started. I am using it to rectify the social erasure of Jewish and Muslim women, some of whom are also women of color. While Black Christian women and white Jewish women face sexism and racism, Jewish and Muslim women of color navigate a triple oppression: sexism, racism, and anti-Semitism or Islamophobia. Patriarchy, the relationships, beliefs, and values embedded in economic, social, and political systems that privilege men over women, and misogyny, contempt for or discrimination against women plague us all. I also use hashtag us too to suggest that social justice requires all hands on deck. And at this point, I just want to say Yasher Koach and applaud the Federation of Jewish Men's Clubs, my colleague Rabbi Noam Raucher and Bud for for inviting me to speak, and also for tackling patriarchy and misogyny in ways that we can all understand. And if you haven't yet read Rabbi Noam's blogs, I encourage you to do so. Feminist scholarship has yet to fully address the relationship between religion and the experiences of ethnic women in addressing the problem of sexual harassment and assault. I use in my research and writing a gendered ethno-religious approach, a three-dimensional framework that uses the intersection of gender with ethnicity and religion as an analytical category for discourse about sexual misconduct and abuse of power. Now, gender is defined as the socially constructed attributes, roles, and behaviors of biological sex. Ethnicity pertains to national origin, language, history, and cultural distinctiveness. Religion is a set of customs, beliefs, and practices. To understand women's encounters with sexual misconduct and abuse of power, we must also fully comprehend ethno-religious womanhood. And now I'll turn to our stories. Jewish women, and I'll be sharing first about Jewish women, then about Muslim women, and finally about Christian women. Jewish women use the written word to speak truth to power. 2 months after the actor Alyssa Milano's October 15th tweet launched the Me Too movement, Then 27-year-old Hillel professional Rhonda Abrams bravely wrote about her experience being sexually harassed by a prominent donor in her West Coast community. Raising funds to support students was one of her most important responsibilities. Being touched without her consent at a breakfast meeting should not come with the territory. According to Abrams, quote, all of the professional leaders that I turn to believe that I should not only stand up for myself, but also speak out so that other Jewish professionals can realize they are not alone. This fight is necessary for us to see change, end quote. Perhaps influenced by the then nascent Me Too movement, her local board, Hillel International, and the Jewish Federation cut off communication with the donor, offered to help replace lost funds, and began communal discussions about sexual harassment. Timing truly is everything. Women who spoke out prior to Me Too did not experience the same communal responses as those who did so after. Debbie Finling reported to the highest ranking Jewish community center professional that her supervisor had propositioned her for sex when it first occurred. However, her abuser was allowed to continue working in the Jewish community, moving from one executive job to another, advancing all the way up the ladder in the Jewish camping world. In March 2018, 3 decades later, Findling asked, do institutions in the Jewish community tacitly allow problematic professionals to move on to other Jewish agencies like a game of hot potato? Her article highlighted how the Jewish community's handling of this abuser was akin to the Catholic Church's handling of problematic priests by reassigning them to other parishes without warning the new ones of the crimes committed, effectively allowing them to continue abusing people for decades. Academia was no different than philanthropy or camping before Me Too. In June of 2018, I publicly shared my experience from 6.5 years earlier, when a prominent sociologist of American Jewry used the pretense of professional advice to lure me to a candlelit dinner far from the Association for Jewish Studies conference we were attending in Washington, D.C., and the prying eyes of our mutual colleagues. As I detailed in the New York Jewish Week, he reached across the dinner table, took my hand in his, probed my romantic life with one inappropriate question after another, and at the end of the evening, kissed me in a manner I can only describe as suitable for lovers. Given his status, my op-ed was shared many, many times, and word spread very quickly in the Jewish community. A Title IX case was opened, and other women came out of the woodwork about his behavior. Following the investigative expose, he resigned under duress from his tenured position at Hebrew Union College. It was a turning point for the Jewish community. Hashtag #MeToo initiatives grew exponentially in 2018 and 2019. Perhaps one of the most visible communal responses was the founding of the Safety, Respect, Equity Network, which brought together Jewish organizations and institutions under one umbrella, starting with a couple dozen and then growing to over 180 strong currently. To ensure that safe, respectful, and equitable workplaces and communal spaces become universal in Jewish life, and that sexual harassment and misconduct, as well as gender and sexual orientation discrimination and their related abuses of power, are no longer tolerated in the Jewish community. More than 100 rabbis joined a webinar on hashtag #MeToo from the pulpit, a rabbi's role in creating safe, respectful synagogue communities. The Central Conference of American Rabbis launched the Task Force on the Experience of Women in the Rabbinate with the Women's Rabbinic Network, acknowledging that 45 years after the first woman became a Reform rabbi, women rabbis were still subjected to gender bias, inappropriate comments, sexual harassment, sexual assault, lack of proper institutional support, undermining behavior, and issues related to contracts, pay equity, and parental leave. The same goes for cantors, so let's just say clergy. The Sacred Spaces organization, hashtag Gamani, Hebrew for Me Too, a private Facebook group, offered people of all genders a safe space to share. The Jewish Women's archiving #MeToo project, and other initiatives providing hotlines and trainings all pointed toward progress, as did investigations and reports, those that were made public. Women in the Muslim community likewise got the mosque to ball rolling in their faith community, using digital media rather than the ethnic press. In 2017, filmmaker and University of Chicago PhD student Nadia Ali heard about her cousin's experience with sexual abuse by a relative and discovered that there was nothing in the public eye about sexual misconduct in the Muslim community. Ali created the film Breaking Silence, starting the conversation about sexual assault in the Muslim community, highlighting the stories of 3 Muslim women. Voted Best Short Documentary winner at the Los Angeles Women's International Film Festival, Breaking Silence loosened the Muslim community's iron grip on the taboo topic by exposing the reality that lack of communication about sex did not prevent abuse. In other words, not discussing it does not make it not happen. It protected sexual predators and simultaneously silenced the Muslim women who they abused. However, some women persisted. Halima Barucha spoke out about sexual harassment on Vimeo, the professional video platform, in May 2018, just before graduating from Seattle University. Along with countless Muslim women, she said, I am breaking the silence in my community. Barucha declared that for too long, Muslims, especially Muslim women, have remained silent, torn between calling out toxic masculinity in the Muslim community and being wary of Islamophobia. Her story, and that of other Muslim American women of color, complicates the Me Too narrative that neglected the twin roles of race and national ancestry. She was born and raised in California, the daughter of immigrant parents. Her mother is from India and her father is Pakistani Myanmar. Like many of the Muslim American women I interviewed, Barucha lived on a tightrope. She called out the patriarchy and sexual misconduct she experienced in the Muslim community, and she defended her community against anti-Muslim stereotypes. The dual challenges of patriarchy and American racism complicate Muslim women's Me Too journeys. Like Jewish women of color, many Muslim American women are triple minorities. They are female, the second sex in a society in which brawn and male earning power still reign supreme. They are a religious minority in a predominantly Christian country, and those who are brown or black people are judged by the color of their skin. Being a triple minority exacerbates the challenge of speaking out about sexual harassment and assault. In many ways, Muslim women of color had a steeper hill to climb than either Jewish or Christian women because of their geopolitical circumstances in the United States after the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001, which irrevocably changed the cultural landscape when brown people became targeted by xenophobic racism that labeled non-white Americans as, quote, suspicious. The echoes of nativism reverberated in the rhetoric used by President Trump in 2019 when he told 4 junior Congresswomen, all women of color, and 3 of whom were born in the United States, to just, quote, go back and help fix the totally broken and crime-infested places from which they came. This racist language from the then and current commander-in-chief, or harasser-in-chief, if you prefer, fueled white supremacy by suggesting that unless someone is white, they are not American. Muslim American women blaze new paths while facing backlash from both Muslim and American groups. On the one hand, they are perceived as too Muslim by white mainstream America that does not understand the heterogeneity within the Muslim community and either suspects them as being potential terrorists or pities them for being oppressed women. On the other hand, they are perceived as not true Muslims by traditional, by traditional Muslim standards that sees Islam through a patriarchal lens that ignores women's agency, blames them for men's misbehavior, and treats male religious leaders as beyond reproach. Muslim men who ignore the Quran's guidance to lower the gaze to not stare at women, chastise women for not wearing headscarves, reinforcing the double standard. Artist, poet, rapper, and chaplain Mona Haydar describes the weaponization of their words as follows, quote, "To the alt-right Americans, I'm bringing Islam and Sharia law to America. And to the other side, I am only a liberal puppet and not even a real Muslim. They both want to kill me." Bilateral fear of physical violence was something unique to Muslim women, something neither Jewish nor Christian women I interviewed expressed concern about as they navigated their Me Too journeys. However, given the surge in anti-Semitism since October 7th, 2023, I believe that there is more concern, certainly among American Jewish women today than there was at the time of my research. The issue of hijab, an Arabic word meaning to cover, plays a distinctive role in the sexual harassment and assault of Muslim women. Wearing the hijab, which covers the head and hair, as well as sometimes the chest, is an article of clothing some Muslim women wear for a variety of personal, political, religious, and/or spiritual reasons. Haydar explains how whether they cover for modesty or consciousness raising, hijabis, as they are called, have experienced a unique form of sexual harassment that has nothing to do with Islam and everything to do with misogyny. So I'm going to show you a 2-minute clip of Haydar's music to illustrate the point, and be aware that you will be seeing a kafia at one point.
My name is Mona Haydar, or if you're not anglicizing my name, Mona Haydar. I grew up in Flint, Michigan, and you might know me from my music video, Rap My Hijab, or Hijabi.
Your hair looks nice. Bet your hair looks nice. How long your hair is, you need to get your life.
You might not know me if you're a white supremacist, because you probably don't like people like me. I love being a woman on the internet because I love representing almost 2 billion people as if we're a monolithic group. And they especially love being reduced to a pregnant rapper chaplain. I'll always be loved by my fans until I wear something that they think is ugly or too covered up or too revealing. And then they'll spend all their extra time trying to convince everybody why I'm a possessed demon woman trying to take everybody to hell with me. I will never need a therapist because everyone is always willing to let me know if my actions and behaviors on social media are a cry for help, like changing my hijab style. I love being a woman on the internet because dudes are always willing to let me know when I'm being reverse toxic patriarchal misogynist. I especially love it when dudes send me messages asking me if I'm married. And then if I don't respond, start threatening my life. And then when I do respond, they ask me if I'm happy in my marriage and let me know how they can make me happy.
Boy, you ain't got no juice. Boy, you drive a Opel. You little boy, your ego, and I cannot give you no boost. Then my voice is hot on, cause you getting turned on. Boy, you might need to put on. Boy, you need to turn down.
I especially love being a pregnant woman on the internet, especially when I got comments from people like, is that safe? Should she be doing that? Or like, she shouldn't be rubbing her belly like that. It's too suggestive. It's too sexual. Like, dude, how do you think I got pregnant to begin with?
Muslim women confront sexual abuse meant combating American Islamophobia and Muslim cultural norms, fostering a code of silence around anything sexual in nature. In 2004, 2 years before the Black Christian activist Tarana Burke coined the phrase Me Too, before hashtags were even a thing, a Muslim woman named Rubina Niaz, who I had the pleasure of meeting at a program at CUNY, started an organization named Turning Point. And it directly helped women and girls to understand that sexual abuse and violence is not their fault. It is not how they dress or the way they talk or the way they walk. It has everything to do with them. It has nothing to do with them. It is the perpetrator that is committing a crime. The Muslim communal response to Me Too now includes organizations to combat gender-based violence, FACE, which stands for Facing Abuse in Community Environments, is actively involved in investigating sexual, physical, financial, and spiritual abuses. Previously, nothing existed to get to the bottom of the abuse, to break the silence that allowed perpetrators to move from one segment of the Muslim community to another. HEART offers education, resources, and language to discuss sexual relationships and violence, while In Sheikh's Clothing works with those affected by abuse and with institutions to prevent abuse, to hold abusers accountable, and to educate Muslims to stand up and recognize abuse. In May 2019, they released the Code of Conduct for Islamic Leadership, a truly pioneering effort. Muslim women's fear of the communal response may be stronger than Jewish women's fears. Researchers found that although unwanted sexual advances from faith leaders was no more prevalent among Muslims than other faith groups, they were slightly more likely, 54% compared to 44%, to have reported the incident to law enforcement. In every group except Muslims, victims are more likely to have reported the incident internally to their faith leadership than to law enforcement. Conversely, Jews were the second least likely to report incidents to law enforcement at just 12%. These findings suggest that Muslim women are more comfortable telling strangers about being sexually abused than they are telling their own religious community leaders. Given the stigma attached to premarital sexual relations of any kind and the history of Islamic clerics blaming women's lack of observance for the misconduct by others, their disinclination to report to Muslim leaders is understandable. Like in the Orthodox Jewish community, where calling out bad behavior is wrongly equated with lashon hara, Hebrew for idle gossip, Muslim women struggle to defy the cultural taboo against reporting sexual misconduct and abuse of power. Text in the Quran referring to talking about someone else's actions as backbiting in a literal sense, quote, eating the flesh off your brother, is inaccurately extended to speaking out about sexual abuse. Islamic law forbids speaking poorly of other people. However, holding back harmful information is not the same thing. According to Imam Khalid Latif, who was very gracious and generous to speak with me and email on multiple occasions, he's NYU's chaplain. Islam supports Muslims coming forward about misbehavior. On January 11th, 2020, the Irma Project held the first of its kind conference to begin normalizing the conversation about Me Too in the Muslim community. The Irma Project is committed to upholding the sacred inviolability of all who enter Muslim spaces from the exploitation and abuse by those holding religious power and authority. While Jewish and Muslim women face challenges to being minorities in a predominantly Christian country, Christian women who spoke out about sexual harassment and assault confronted powerful church hierarchies, entrenched systems that supported predators' reputations, and massive cover-ups. Their fears were unrelated to bringing shame to their faith community or people. Instead, they were directly tied to the devastation coming forward wrought on their professional careers, families, and religious lives. Although one might think it would be easier for women who are members of the majority religion in America, for whom neither anti-Semitism nor Islamophobia was a factor, sexism plagued them as it did all women, and religious zeal for female purity exacerbated their shame. For Black Christian women and Christian women of color, racism compounded sexism by adding another prejudice. In addition, being members of the Christian majority meant that when they spoke out, it disrupted the status quo of much larger faith communities and caused widespread consternation among their co-religionists. Christian women who fueled the Church Tomb movement defied a world order predicated on submission to church leaders, and in so doing transformed Christianity. Ruth Everhart was raised in a white Dutch ethnic enclave and attended Calvin College, now Calvin University in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And during her senior year, Everhart was brutally raped. She was living off campus with housemates when two men broke in, held the women who had been sleeping hostage at gunpoint, robbed and raped them. In the immediate aftermath of the assault, she found neither help nor healing on her Christian campus. When she approached pastors and professors, she was told to, quote, move on. It would take many years for Everhart to overcome the church's emphasis on virginity that idealized sexual purity, and for her to heed the call to ministry. The perpetrators were caught, tried, found guilty, and sentenced to life in prison, a legal anomaly. While she found justice through the legal system, Everhart's disappointment in her religious community increased exponentially when she fought for ecclesiastical justice after being assaulted by a pastor twice her age. Buoyed by her earlier experience of an effective justice system, Everhart navigated more treacherous terrain after her immediate superior first groomed and then forcibly kissed her less than 2 years after her ordination. Just as female clergy, Jewish clergy, were harassed by senior rabbis and congregants, the ministry was no safe haven for Christian women clergy. Everhart was working at the Penfield Presbyterian Church in a wealthy suburb of Rochester, New York, her family of four sole provider. The senior reverend, a widower, initiated frequent lunches, proposed possibly becoming co-pastors, which would have increased Everhart's salary, brought her small gifts, and asked intrusive personal questions. Everhart described the power imbalance, which quite frankly is painful to read and sadly familiar. Quote, I felt like a hostage. He held power over me in every way. He was seasoned in ministry while I was inexperienced. He was financially secure while I was impoverished. He was well connected in the denomination's regional networks while I was unknown. He was established at the church while I was brand new. He was the boss while I was the subordinate. He was male and I was not. Although her second abuser did not point an actual gun at her, the paralyzing effect was similar. Countless Christian women have had similar experiences that rape their souls, if not their bodies, in their places of employment, their churches, and their faith communities. Despite her precarious professional position, Everhart was emboldened by her hard work on behalf of her faith community and determined to bring the sexual assault to the attention of church leaders. Colleagues encouraged her to stay silent, yet she persisted. She had become a religious leader in defiance of historical feminine ideals that valued women's submissiveness and our silence over our bodies and spirits. Everhart faced her abuser in front of the church's personnel committee. One committee member insisted she had misunderstood, that the senior reverend felt only pure Christian love for her. Another opined that her previous trauma of rape, which Everhart had shared in confidence, made her, quote, uniquely vulnerable. Hers was a classic case of being gaslit and with no real accountability for the predator. He remarried shortly thereafter and was given a trip to the Holy Land as a wedding gift by the church. In December 2017, Everhart penned a pastor's Me Too story, which was published in the Christian Century. In 2018, the Book of Order, the Presbyterian Church USA's guide for governance that includes rules of discipline, incorporated new language related to sexual misconduct and abuse of power. Everhart may not take credit for this change. As women, after all, we are socialized not to seek recognition, but I am certain that she deserves it. Our society is too quick to applaud star athletes and celebrities without first recognizing those who set the wheels in motion. While the Olympians, Aly Raisman and Simone Biles, are more familiar, it was Rachel Denhollander, a gymnast turned attorney, who first called out USA Gymnastics and Michigan State for failing to protect young gymnasts from the monster pedophile Larry Nassar. She was raised in a non-denominational church and describes her current faith as a conservative evangelical form of Christianity. When it comes to the Christian community, Denhollander told me, regarding sexual misconduct and abuse of power, it starts with our theology, because by and large, that's what drives the problems in the church. At first, I have to admit, I was surprised to hear a devout Christian woman say that the root of evil in the church is religious beliefs. But the more that I listened to her, the more I saw the similarity between our communities. It isn't the actual religious tenets that create trouble. Rather, it's the misinterpretation and manipulation of them that causes pastors, rabbis, and imams to overlook abuse in their churches, synagogues, and mosques, which simultaneously deters women from calling out abusers. Den Hollander describes the outsized power that elevates male Christian leaders. In the Christian faith, we see pastors to have a degree of authority over their congregants, she said. In evangelical circles, oftentimes we don't recognize the limits of that authority. When women try to speak out about abuse by pastors, they are viewed as, quote, bringing down a godly man. Bringing down a godly man is seen as a direct affront to the teachings of Christ. Fortunately, Den Hollander sees straight through this hypocrisy. And as she said, it defies the gospel of Christ when we do not call out abuse and enable abuse in our own church. The fact that only men can be pastors in her denomination compounds the power dynamics. The man always has more communal power than the woman. Like Everhart and Den Hollander, Ashley Easter, and yes, that is her surname, Easter, is a woman redefining Christianity for herself and others. She grew up in the independent fundamentalist Baptist denomination. Her father is a deacon, and her grandfather was a pastor. She was homeschooled, as was customary, and did not know many people outside of the immediate church community. Easter describes her experience as cult-like, focused around keeping unmarried women at home to learn homemaking skills, submitting to their fathers until they got married, and then submitting to their husbands. It is nothing short of a miracle when a person raised in an environment that teaches women to be subordinate to men realizes her own worth and breaks free. Easter's family and church condoned a courtship with a physically and emotionally abusive and controlling man. They told her, "You must submit." Fortunately, instead, she ended the relationship, used her babysitting money to buy a car, and escaped from her family and her community. From the moment Easter began reading about Christian feminism, she developed her own understanding of and relationship with Christianity. As she tore down the walls of the cult in which she had grown up, Easter looked for a new form of Christianity based on equality between sexes. She found it in the Progressive Christian Alliance. Easter explains, "My path to justice is sharing my story, therapy, deconstructing my faith, and reconstructing it in a healthy way." Her persistence is inspiring. Easter became a vocal activist calling out the Southern Baptist Convention, a massive organization, for years of abuse, both sexist and racist. Apparently, it took making sexual abuse public in a very big way to get the SBC to finally act. In June 2019, a resolution was passed at the annual meeting titled on the Evil of Sexual Abuse, in response to the new revelations, deplored abuse, apologized for not cultivating a culture of protection from it, condemned leaders who protected perpetrators, and defined sexual abuse as not only a sin punishable by the church, but also by the civil government. In February 2021, SBC expelled 2 churches for hiring registered sex offenders as pastors. That same year, a resolution was passed stating that any person who has committed sexual abuse is permanently disqualified from holding the office of pastor. And affiliated churches were encouraged to apply this standard to all positions of church leadership. It remains to be seen, however, whether SBC churches enforce the recommendation to disqualify sexual abusers from leadership positions or eventually ignores it. Oftentimes, religious organizations and institutions only do what they are absolutely required to do, not what their governing body merely recommends. And this all makes me wonder how much any religious community that recommends but does not mandate will truly change to prevent abuse from occurring in the first place. I've come to realize that the most important thing that I share with my siblings of all faith backgrounds, including our male allies, is an unwavering commitment to truth and to speaking truth to power, and even when it comes at great personal and professional expense. Changing behaviors that were ingrained for generations, one might say millennia, takes considerably more time and energy than launching new communal initiatives. Until we live in a society, in a world that teaches don't rape, rather than the current and ongoing don't get raped, there is much more work to do. Additionally, the very real fight to take away women's rights to their bodily autonomy, even in the case of rape and incest, that is the right to choose abortion and the access to a safe one without having to travel across state lines and at great financial expense, is critical. As the three Supreme Court Justices Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan lamented about the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe v. Wade, quote, with sorrow for this court, but more for the many millions of American women who have today lost a fundamental constitutional protection, we dissent. If women continue to have to fight for this basic human and civil right, I believe that the systems and structures that keep male privilege and power intact will undermine all faith communities' efforts to end sexual misconduct and abuses of power. There is much more work to do to make Jewish, Muslim, and Christian communities truly safe, respectful, and equitable. To conclude, while we are not required to perfect the world, neither are we permitted to desist from trying to repair it. Now, I was fortunate to meet women from different religions who inspired me to keep speaking out and advocating for women navigating their own Me Too journeys, and for systemic and structural changes in institutions and organizations. And as those who shared their stories with me, I am a vault. I believe we will make more progress by working together across religious lines than alone. I hope you will take from this talk a little bit of inspiration, a little bit of chutzpah, or maybe a lot, and know that you, whatever gender you are, can make a difference in sacred and secular spaces. You can be an upstander, you can be an ally. When you see or experience an injustice, you can say something, you can do something. Action is not optional. A just society is a moral and civic responsibility. If we want safe, respectful, and equitable communities and campuses, we must internalize that we are our communities and campuses. It is up to us to fix them. Hashtag us too. And with that, thank you again for the privilege of sharing my experience and research. And I'm going to stop sharing so that I can see you and open it up to questions or comments.
Thank you, Dr. McGinity, so much for your presentation, your wisdom, your articulateness about this. This was a real privilege, a very eye-opening one, and yes, a very hard one to deal with as well, given the reality of the situation, which you spoke to so eloquently. There are two questions that I have for Dr. McGinity. You bring up in 2016, 17 is when this issue really became well known for the Jewish community, if not a little bit sooner. I remember speaking about it as a rabbi when it became, something that we were all talking about. Have you seen, since it's been 8 years since then, any growth in the Jewish community formally in synagogues or in Jewish institutions that would be to make it a more safe, equitable, and respectful environment?
Thank you so much for the question. And yes and no. I certainly have seen progress. I think the Me Too movement, the hashtag Gamani movement in particular in the Jewish community, raised it, raised the consciousness of many folks, and there, because of the organizations like the Safety, Respect, and Equity Network and Sacred Spaces, and others, there is a greater focus on creating not just policies, sexual harassment policies that are documents that get filed away somewhere and never look at them again, but more and more trainings and more emphasis on how do we live our values? How do we treat everyone B'Tselem Elohim, created in the divine image? And how do our values relate to this particular challenging topic? So when I say yes and no, yes, there are a lot there. I'm afraid of not mentioning someone, so I won't mention all the examples of progress. And at the same time, there are still institutions that conduct investigations but don't share the reports publicly, which make it very difficult to hold perpetrators accountable. So there's still a lack of transparency. There's the fear of litigation, the fear of hurting people's careers and so forth. There's still the kind of bandwidth circling the wagons effect that occurs. And let's face it, it's tough. It's tough on everyone. And there's also the fear that folks have, like, did they do something wrong in the past, and will that come back to haunt them? And what do we do with that information? And what I'd just like to conclude my response to you with is the idea that we're all learning, and we're all human, and it's okay to make mistakes on this learning journey as long as we're moving forward. And the process is one in which we all have the opportunity to fulfill our human potential, and to respect our human right to be safe from sexual misconduct and abuse of power.
I appreciate that very much. Look, let's be honest about it. Your stories were very honest. The perpetrators of these crimes are men entirely, right? Not predominantly. They are all men in those circumstances, even if they are supported by an environment that involves women in it as well, that make it hard to believe the victims too. I'm curious to know, what is it that Jewish men can particularly do to help make their immediate environments that they occupy on a communal level in particular safe, respectful, and equitable for all. FJMC, I'm proud. I'll get back to the question. I'm proud to say that FJMC really just focuses on self-awareness and how men can be a positive force in the world. But knowing that sexual harassment and violence takes place, right, even in mundane environments like we, exist in, what can Jewish men do to help make them more safe, respectful, and equitable?
I love that question, and thank you so much for asking it. First, I want to make a quick clarifying remark, which is that all genders can and do perpetrate sexual harassment and abuse of power. Okay, so yes, it is predominantly men, predominant against women, but the majority. But I want to be very clear that women also harass, assault men, and we can get into LGBTQ, transgender. I mean, it's
Sure.
fluidity and so forth. So across the board,
Thank you.
no individual and no religious community is immune. In other words, with regard to what can Jewish men do, what can all men do? Um, first, I would say to do some really deep exploration, um, and to think about how has American toxic masculinity infiltrated or permeated your lives in ways that you may or may not be fully conscious of. And how does that manifest? What's being said in the locker room or the bar or in the meeting where there are only um, male presenting men present? And is any of that something that you would want someone to say to your mother, your sister, your daughter, your niece, right? And if the answer is no, then why are people still saying it? And when you hear something that someone says, or you see something that someone does, to not just brush it off as, in the case of, someone, I'll use the name John. No John in particular. Oh, that's just John being John. Oh, that's so and so, like boys will be boys. No. How about let's treat everyone as they are, that they have the divine spark in them, and to treat them as we wish to be treated. And I mean, I'm thinking about, I was at a work retreat the beginning of this week, and a rabbi with all the best intentions went to, embrace me. Maybe I don't want to be embraced. So, we can ask, may I hug you? Or, would it be okay if? Everyone can ask that. We shouldn't let our own experiences or our own comfort level with being physically touched, we shouldn't project them onto other people and expect that they will be equally comfortable with what we say and what we do. We should ask
Thank you,
questions.
Dr. McGinity.
Pleasure. Thank you.
I'm checking it doesn't look like anyone's asking any topical questions. This session will be recorded and will be available to the public as well. So if anyone wants to use it as a resource, you're welcome to. Hazan Rabbi Penny Myers shares a personal story. I'll read it for anyone who can't see it, since the publicity in Hadassah and your writing about my narrative in your book, I can share that my speaking up and out retaliation has ensued. My pulpit career has stalled because I am considered a troublemaker. I knew what I was doing when I spoke up and out. I fell on my proverbial professional sword to hold laity accountable for a safe work environment. A majority of my colleagues have NDAs and have been harmed, but have been paralyzed, but are paralyzed. How do you envision the Jewish organization world to be able to acknowledge and take responsibility for the secondary harms that they help to perpetuate? I see. Yes.
Oof. Well, Chazan Rabbi
Thank
Penny,
you, Rabbi Myers.
thank you, Rabbi Myers. And thank you for participating in my study and sharing your story, and for your courage. And you can read more about her story in the book, which, by the way, I want to make sure we include the link. The book is available via open access to download or read online for free. So I can pull that up, or Noam, if you have it, we can put that
I'll
in the
look for it
chat.
right now.
People, thank
Yeah.
you so much. You're of course welcome to buy the new edition. Just came out in paperback, which is certainly more affordable than the hardback that was geared toward research libraries. But please, by all means, use open access. The secondary harm, that is unfortunately very not well understood or appreciated. And I empathize, and I share your experience in terms of being a whistleblower. That being said, you know, um, uh, women who aren't don't necessarily make history. So, I mean, you've made history, and I think it's really it's about how do we hold our leadership accountable? How do we right the wrongs and say, you know, this is not about being a troublemaker or a whistleblower. This is about really living our values and making sure that we implement them and uphold them, rather than making exceptions or falling into, well, it's easier not to say anything, and NDAs are a whole topic unto themselves, which is exceedingly difficult, and I will say it's gotten harder over time to speak out, and to my dismay and chagrin, I mean, I am challenged to find the eternal optimism that I usually try to bring to every talk that I give, because in reality, people talk about the Me Too movement now as if it's in the past, and I say it's ongoing. it's still moving, but we need to keep it moving. But I can share. I mean, there was a time when my emails, my Facebook messages, my texts, I was hearing from people regularly who were trying to navigate a way forward, right? With hopefully without sacrificing their careers, or their lives. But I'm not hearing from people as much as I did before, not nearly as frequently. And that is a huge alarm bell, because if people are, you know, suppressing, as I did for a number of years, as many people have done, sometimes for decades, um, then we haven't sufficiently made it easier. I think what all faith communities need to do, and certainly what the Jewish community has yet to do, that we absolutely must do, is normalize coming forward, normalize speaking out. But instead, you know, we make it like exceptional in some way. And I was told many times, "Oh, you're a hero." No, I'm not a hero. I don't suppress. I have no superpowers. I was compelled to speak out, to come forward, to protect other people, as my colleague here was as well, and others. It's not something anyone wants to do, right? But it's what we have to do as Jews, as people of all religions, if we want to live in a truly just world. This is what we have to do. And we need to help each other do it in whatever ways we can and through whatever means we can. And sometimes, I believe in working from within institutions and working with leadership and trying to help everyone figure out a way forward that doesn't mean that everything's going to implode. However, if after trying to work from within, as I did within the Association for Jewish Studies, um, you know, it becomes clear that it's not going to happen, or it's not going to happen within a reasonable time frame. And by reasonable, I mean, preventing other people from being hurt, then that's when we find alternative measures. That may include speaking to a member of the media. It may include writing an op-ed. It may include a digital video of some kind. I mean, there are other ways of getting it out. And I mean, we need sunlight to disinfect and to become the communities that we were truly intended to be. We can't be a beacon unto nations with this around our necks. So I
Thank you,
have faith.
Doctor.
We can do it. We just have to keep moving. In other words.
Thank you, Dr. McGinity. FJMC certainly helps to support that fight and creating those safe spaces. And FJMC men will certainly be men that are safe spaces unto themselves that help create those spaces. So thank you for bringing that to our attention and holding us accountable. And we will hold each other accountable in that way too. I want to allow for one more question, if there possibly is one, if anyone has one. It doesn't seem to be any more in the chat boxes. So if there are no more questions, I'll just remind everyone to please take a moment to visit the FJMC website and register for a convention if you have not done so. This year it's in Chicago over 4th of July weekend. You can see in my background there, beautiful Chicago. They've got an amazing trip planned. If you're bringing your spouse, bring your spouse. We got activities for the spouses too. So it'll be a blast. Please join us. And don't forget to register for Rabbi Dan Horowitz, who will speak on his book, Just Jewish, which is about how to engage millennials in your Jewish community on Sunday, April 6th at 4:30 p.m. Pacific time, at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. And there is a new message. Someone is saying, thank you so very much. Thank you so very much. Our patrons of the FJMC community, we love you so dearly. If you wish to make a donation to FJMC, you can certainly do so. I should have put that link in the chat box. I'll hear about that in tomorrow's meeting. But I want to thank you all for joining us today. It was a pleasure seeing you all. Thank you for staying this whole time and your patience as we worked out our technical difficulties. Dr. McGinity, you are a blessing to this community and a true guide. We appreciate your guidance. We appreciate your leadership. We need more people like you in our community. Thank you so much for spending this evening with us. We look forward to more of your wisdom in the future. Toda rabah. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a lovely evening.